Hello, everybody. I'm Carl Silverstein with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, and thank you for joining our webinar today on spring ephemeral wildflowers. We have lots of folks joining the webinar, so we'll just take another couple of minutes to let folks get logged in, and then we'll start the webinar. Looks like folks are still joining us, so we'll just give it another minute or two so everybody can be online. All right. Well, again, thank you for joining our webinar on spring ephemeral wildflowers in the Southern Appalachians. I'm Carl Silverstein with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, and I'm thrilled to welcome Owen Carson, who is a senior botanist and ecologist with Equinox Environmental and has been an integral part of helping SAHC document botanical significance on properties that we own and manage and conservation easements we hold. So again, we welcome Owen and then all of you. And if you have questions, you can put those in the chat during the presentation and we'll try to get those answered, or we'll have a time at the end too if you want to ask questions at the end. So Owen, please take it away.
Awesome. Here we go. All right. Emma, can I just get a thumbs up? You can see my screen. Good to go. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Carl. Thanks all the folks who are joining this webinar. This is exciting. Perfect time of year to be talking about spring ephemeral wildflowers, and I am just really, really happy to be here. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge the relationship with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy that Carl alluded to, between SAHC and Equinox. Equinox was founded 25 years ago, and we got started helping organizations like SAHC and other land trusts, fill the gaps where they needed help, documenting natural resource values, conducting environmental assessments, anything we could to help them protect land. And that relationship has continued strong for the last 25 years. And in my tenure at Equinox, 15 years, I spent my first day working on an SAHC related property, and continue to this day to assist y'all with all sorts of wonderful land conservation opportunities, and also botanical assessments on fee-owned properties, really anything we can to help further SAHC's mission. So we're just excited and want to just acknowledge everything that y'all do. Such great work, including putting on public information sessions like this. So quick agenda. I'm just going to go over briefly about who I am, why I'm here talking to you. We're going to talk about the kind of the what, when, and where of ephemeral wildflowers. And then I'm just going to run through a bunch of slides with kind of iconic examples of Southern Appalachian ephemeral wildflowers, and also include some oddities in there that may be off the beaten path, that have some interesting ecological histories and other notable things. And so we'll take some time at the end, probably the last 15 minutes or so, to ask and answer questions. That being said, as Carl mentioned, if there is something burning, a question burning in your mind, and you don't want me to leave that slide and you want to touch on it, drop your message in the chat and Emma will help facilitate that Q&A in the moment. So, who am I? Well, I'm just a regular guy. I am a botanist and ecologist with Equinox. Equinox is a firm based out of Asheville, but serving the Southern Appalachian region. And we help people protect land, water, and habitat, and help folks develop in a way that is sustainable. We do that with a group of designers, a group of conservation planners, and a group of ecologists. And we work together to effect all sorts of really wonderful conservation-based projects, land planning, master planning, ecological design, really interesting stormwater designs. Equinox is a really diverse company full of wonderful people, and I'm really proud of what we do. Outside of my professional career, and as I said earlier, I've been with Equinox for 15 years. I live in Brevard, graduated from Brevard College in 2008. That's where I met my wife, Sarah, who you see on the screen here. We are raising 10, almost 11-year-old twins, Hazel and Liam. I spend time coaching, I spend time gardening, both food gardening, which I'm not great at, but more so kind of wildscaping, native plant gardening. I love to adventure. I donate my time as a public servant to the Transylvania County Natural Resources Council, where I'm the chair. We're an advisory committee to the Board of Commissioners. And I'm also on the City of Brevard's Public Works and Utilities Subcommittee, which helps discuss all things public works, water, sewer, and environmental health. So, and I also spend some time advocating for our natural habitats in our environment. It's now more so than ever. It's really important to speak up, speak out, and stand behind our land, our water, and our habitats because they are increasingly jeopardized on a daily basis. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about ephemeral wildflowers. The what, the when, and the where. So there are some wide-ranging definitions of what constitutes ephemeral. And I just want to make it known that, that for this presentation, I'm going with this green definition at top, which is any herbaceous plant that emerges from the forest floor in spring and flowers before leaves fully appear on the trees. Now, there's some nuance here. There are some what folks might call true ephemerals that complete their entire life cycle and then go dormant within this period of time before leaves fully appear. There are also some that have parts that linger later on into the summer and then vanish, and even some that have parts that linger all the way up until senescence at the end of fall. And so it's a wide-ranging definition, but what we're talking about is kind of the bursting forth, the first colorful wildflowers, the ones that you find on the forest floor, really before the canopy fully closes in and all of that light is blocked to the forest floor. So we're talking mid-February through late May with emergence of these types of flowers. And they emerge in a time when it's really tough. So they've got limited resources and they're under challenging conditions. And so, you know, what are we talking about? We're talking about low soil temps. It's not easy to uptake water or nutrients when the soil is at a low temperature. Most plants have a hard time doing that. There, of course, there's low pollinator availability. Everything is pretty much asleep during those early spring moments. And of course, they're looking at the rapid growth of canopy above, leading to a loss of light. And of course, as spring pushes towards summer, the temperatures warm up, and most ephemeral plants find warming conditions to be challenging, and they will begin to shut down for the season when that happens. So, you know, emerging at a time where there are limited resources and emerging under challenging conditions, these plants have evolved specialized adaptations to deal with that and to be able to continue forward and reproduce successfully, even in the face of some of these challenges. And so things like phased growth patterns. So their life history is generally speaking for ephemerals, the life history is broken into 2 phases, and we'll talk about that next, the when. But most of these plants can affect early and accelerated and super efficient photosynthesis. So they can photosynthesize With the newest of leaves, they can photosynthesize at really low temperatures, kind of at the minimum threshold for photosynthesis to happen. And they have specialized structures that help them maximize efficiency during photosynthesis. And so they're really gaining every little bit of energy from those leaves when they're doing it because they've got a very short period of time. They've also got these interesting structural adaptations for energy conservation. Most ephemeral plants kind of compartmentalize their energy so that, as they're spending time and energy growing and flowering, they also need to be starting to send resources back down so they can secure them and then, wait the whole summer and into fall and winter before they pop up again. And so they're able to specialize. And for example, a lot of ephemeral plants are using their basal leaves to pump carbohydrates down into their root stores. And they're finishing flowering using the energy left in the stem. And so they're not using energy from the bulb or from the leaves. That's all going towards storage. And they're finishing flowering and seed set with energy that is contained within the stem. So they have these structural adaptations for energy conservation. A lot of ephemeral plants also have really interesting and unique mycorrhizal networks compared to some other plants. At a time when soil moisture is low and soil nutrients are low, they've got to kind of work a little bit harder. And so they've tapped into the fungal network, and oftentimes most of them, not all of them, but most of them have complex relationships that allow that, and they lean on this fungi to obtain water and nutrients at a time when they're really in short supply. And so that's another interesting adaptation, specialization that these flowers have to deal with the conditions. And then a lot of them exhibit this really interesting trait of myrmecochory, which is a very complex term, difficult to pronounce when you see it, but it just means that the fruit and or seeds are ant dispersed. And the picture that you see on the screen down here in the bottom right shows an example of bloodroot seeds, and the seed is adapted for this myrmecochorous relationship. And what you see is the actual seed, the kind of the dark reddish brown nutlet there, and then this kind of like foamy looking, fatty looking appendage sticking off of it. And what that is, it's a gift to ants. And so when the seed pod matures and splits open and the seeds fall out, they hit the ground, and there's this offering of fatty tissue. It's called an eliosome. It looks like an exterior structure that is an offering for the ants, and the ants recognize that very valuable food material again at a good early time in the year, and they proceed to gather the seed with the eliosome and all, and carry it back to their respective homes and take them underground, where they strip the eliosome off and use it for food, and then discard the seed in like a waste chamber somewhere in their nest, and they effectively plant the seed. And so a lot of these spring ephemeral plants exhibit this trait, and the seeds may look different. The eliosome, the offering, the fatty tissue, the structure may be different from species to species, but they all kind of had this added gift that benefits their reproductive survival. And so, the ants get something out of it, and the wildflowers get something out of it. So, these are some kind of key elements that make a spring ephemeral plant. Not all of them have them, so take this slide with a grain of salt, but a lot of these characteristics apply to most of the plants that we'll be talking about today, and to most ephemerals. And I'll see if I can touch on some specific examples where, this isn't the case and why. So the when. I talked about, on the previous slide, I talked about phased growth patterns. Well, most spring ephemerals exhibit this pattern that you see. So we'll start at the flowering here. They emerge their leaves, emerge with their flowers. it's this epigeous growth period, and that's when they are expending energy from the root stores to grow leaves and to produce a flowering stalk and flowers. And then, the leaves are photosynthesizing, gaining energy as the flower becomes pollinated and successfully um, uh, falls to the ground. And so as the plant then begins to finish its epigeous growth period in spring, the seed will drop, and a lot of plants, with the exception of a few, all of the above ground parts will senesce, and so will fall and drop, and then it will move into a dormant period. So in summer, hottest time of year, periods of wet and dry, they're not above ground. They're chilling underground. And into autumn, they begin their hypogeous growth period, which is when they are growing roots, extending lateral rhizome roots if they form networks and colonies. They are producing buds for the coming spring. And so, yes, in autumn and in winter, these ephemerals are doing arguably like the most work the entire season. And so they're underground, out of sight, out of mind, preparing for this burst in spring. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to that was why I really appreciate these plants, is because they have a really complex and challenging life history, and put in all this work in a period when everything else is sleeping, and then provide this wonderful display in spring. So this hypogeous and epigeous growth, this kind of dual growth pattern, is one that is consistent across a lot of spring ephemeral plants. So we've talked about the what, and we've talked about the when. So I do want to touch on the where, because there are some go-to places for spring ephemerals that are typically are the cove setting. However, ephemeral plants can occur in a wide variety of places. And so it's important to I have this diagram over here just kind of pointing out different landforms, because in my work, I find ephemeral wildflowers in all of these different places. It may be consistent patterns as to which ones occur in which places, but you can find interesting ephemeral wildflowers spread across the topographic landscape. And so they occur on dry ridges, they occur on rocky bluffs, at summits, of course, typically in cove settings, both rich and acidic, and in saddles. And so, that image over there is just to kind of give you an idea of a typical landscape and where you might find some of these things. What isn't shown on this map is like a floodplain, and floodplains are also places where ephemeral plants grow. It's not a place where folks often go to look for them, but a wide diversity of ephemeral plants do occur in floodplains. So it's really interesting to botanize them in springtime, because you can be surprised by what you find. But kind of going back slightly, our landscapes are built from the underlying geology. They're dictated by the geologic occurrences. And so that's not only kind of the formations and the rock types, but also kind of the landforms. And so where we have more or less resistant rock and how that has shaped the landform. The geology is truly the underlying component of the entire ecosystem. And the type of rock that is there on the geologic map, underlying where you may be looking, it matters. And I think it can help you predict what you might see in a ephemeral wildflower setting based on that parent material, the underlying geologic material. Oftentimes we kind of have it on like a bimodal spectrum. It's either rich or it's acid. And if you hear that, that's just referring to the richness, referring to the pH of the soil. And the higher the pH, generally the more supportive that soil is of a wider range of plant diversity. Versus more acidic, so lower pH, is generally prohibitive to overall plant diversity. There are some specialists that love acidic environments and also specialists that love rich environments. But that's when you see those terms rich versus acid, and really the geologic material underneath helps to kind of drive the types of soils that you see, and that whether you're seeing a rich soil in an area that is underlain by amphibolite, which is high in iron, and magnesium, which drive the pH higher, versus something like a cove over Henderson gneiss, for example, which is a generally acidic rock type and gives way to acidic soils with the lower pH that don't have as high of plant diversity. Rock type matters. And there's also this word edaphic. That's an interesting term. You may or may not run across it in your pursuits of wildflowers, but an edaphic site is where the geology immediately dictates the environment. And so it'd be like a restrictive geologic layer very close to the surface that drives a highly different environment within that area compared to other surrounding areas. And so that's an edaphic site. And I won't talk about any of those today. Generally, those are like glades and barrens, things like that. And we do have those in the mountains here, but generally you have more extensive glade ecosystems a little further east or south. Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, those places have really interesting glades that are built on top of limestone, for example. And so, we don't have a lot of lime here, and therefore, we don't see a similar type of plant diversity. But, in the kind of the Appalachian Divide where the Smokies meet, we do see a lot of crossover there, and the geology, of the Smokies is notably rich, and so that's why people go there for big spring ephemeral displays. We talked about topography, and I think one other thing that I want to point out is the aspect matters a lot. A cove that faces south versus a cove that faces north will oftentimes have a wildly different flora in it. And that's just a matter of sun exposure and the ambient moisture in those habitats. And so, like north and east facing things are generally, mesic in nature or moist in nature. South and west facing areas are generally drier. Coves on the landform tend to harbor water resources, and so therefore you could hypothesize that coves are generally more mesic than ridges are. And of course, areas that are adjacent to riparian areas, adjacent to streams or rivers, have influence from groundwater, influence from flooding, and so those dynamics also play a really big role in these preferred habitats and where we might find some of these species. So we've talked about the what, the when, the where, and now I want to kind of dive into a rundown and show you and talk through some really iconic examples of ephemeral plants that you probably have seen around here. Maybe you haven't. And some interesting facts about them, relate them back to some things we just heard, and just kind of run through a list of common, iconic, and then some strange examples of ephemeral plants and wildflowers. So let's get into it. This is in no particular order, and I also need to say that I certainly will miss some flowers. In a 45-minute presentation, there's just simply no way to include everything, but I thought really hard about it, and I think I have a good mix of species here to talk about. So let's get into it. The bellworts. These are charismatic wildflowers. They're in the marybells family. This is an April to May flowering plant. Pretty diverse range of habitats for the genus Uvularia. There's several species that you might find here. commonly, and they occur well, two of them occur in similar habitats, and then one occurs in different. But kind of typical features: distinctly alternating leaves, up the stem, and that kind of nod downwards, and then they have these beautiful nodding bell-shaped flowers, of varying degrees. Some are more or less bell-shaped. But these two examples here of the flowers, we have perfoliata in the top left, and then we have grandiflora in the right. Those are pretty showy examples of the flowers, both the color and kind of the shape of them. And so when you run up on a patch of these, it's very nice. They're pollinated by native bees, and when the seed pods are ready, they split open, and what do we have? Seeds with elysomes. So we've got an ant dispersed genera here. And the one that you're seeing here with my hand in the picture, that's an immature seed pod, but this is Uvularia puberula, and this is a Southern Appalachian endemic. This is the species that is hairy. I don't know if you can see it close enough in this image, but if you were to zoom in on it, the stem of this is hairy, the leaf margin is hairy, and it occurs in mostly acidic habitats, or oak hickory leaning on the acidic side. I see this intermingled with cow wheat. I see this intermingled with pink lady slipper sometimes. So it's one that prefers more acidic soil. But the species you'll find here, perfoliata, grandiflora, and puberula. So the bellworts, very beautiful. And fun fact, I had to kind of do some research on the pollination mechanisms, because I've seen a lot of them in the field, but never ever seen one being visited by an insect. So it tells me I need to sit down next time I see one and watch for a while. Bloodroot, and this is one that I'm sure almost everybody on this call recognizes. Bloodroot is one of our iconic spring ephemerals, not only because it is so eye-catching when it emerges and so showy, but also because it has a unique cultural history, and it's just a widely recognized plant. So it's in the poppy family. We see this plant emerging late February. These are actually flowers from my garden in Brevard in late February that are just, you can see the petals are enclosed with the early leaves at that point. But generally a March to April emerging and flowering plant. And if you've ever seen it up close or felt the petals before, they're very delicate. And so this plant is truly ephemeral in nature. A good rainstorm can knock the petals off of newly emerged flowers. And so they're there for a very short period of time. And they're bright white, like I said, very eye-catching. And then those leaves, too, are really beautiful, radiating from that central point. You see a lot of diversity in the shape and the lobes. I've seen some that have like 20 lobes on them, others that almost have no lobes at all. And so, lots of variation within both the leaves and the flowers. And as you see here, this is a variety that actually exists in the nursery trade. This is a wild one that I found, but it does have a tendency to kind of double or even triple its petal structure. And so there are some really floriferous examples in the nursery trade that you can buy that almost look like a poppy. They have so many petals. But again, beautiful, eye-catching, iconic, pollinated by mining bees and sweat bees primarily. And so, if you sit there and watch these flowers, they are covered in bees often. And again, when the pod splits open, ants spread the seeds through the same mechanisms we discussed earlier. Okay, hepatica, liverleaf. Another really wonderful and iconic spring wildflower. These usually occur in ridge coves primarily only in rich coves. Maybe some rich forested slopes here and there on outcrops or kind of in boulder fields with nutrient-rich rock types. But you'll see these popping up in March through May, and oftentimes you'll notice the flowers before you even notice the leaves, because in Americana, which is the kind of round-lobed example you see over here, the leaves stay pretty flat to the ground. With Acuta loba here in the bottom left, those leaves tend to kind of extend and emerge as the flowers emerge. And so you see more of those leaves in that species along with the flowers than you do in Americana. But again, this very, very beautiful, remarkable modeling in the leaves. You can see both in the Americana here, but also in this Acuta loba, just wonderful leaf modeling. I think that's why people love it for the garden. But it's striking, and these beautiful flowers, white to almost neon purple to bluish, are born, and they are visited by solitary bees and flies, and again, seeds spread by ants. So the ants are doing a lot of work for these species, and that will prove true as we move through these slides. So again, Hepatica here, great plant to go to see in rich coves, rocky areas. Sometimes you see it in stream sides, but not in places that are actually wet. All right, spring beauty, Claytonia. Now this is one that is relatively ubiquitous across the landscape. I showed you that map earlier, and I see this one in ridgetop forests on steep slopes. I see it in rich coves. I see it in floodplains. About the only place I don't see it is in acidic environments. And so this is a plant that seems to enjoy, richer soils. And as you can see from this picture down here, it produces these corms, these bulbs beneath the ground, and that's one of its mechanisms of spread. It forms new corms off of rootlets as it expands in these patches. But those corms are actually often dug up by squirrels and chipmunks and are eaten by wildlife, but are edible and are apparently pretty tasty. I probably should have said this at the beginning, but you might see the word edible in some slides here. I encourage you to keep that fact just a fact, and in this day and age, where there are social media influencers encouraging people to explore the real world and forage the real world, I do think it's important to note edibility, because this does have cultural significance, in indigenous cultures and even settlement cultures. This is eaten by poor Appalachian folk, but we don't need to eat it anymore. We have grocery stores where we can buy food, and it's better to leave these plants where they are. And so I would encourage you to just learn that it is edible, but please don't act on edibility or promote, large scale harvesting of native plants. They're already under a lot of pressure. So there's an interesting relationship here with a spring beauty miner bee. There's a special bee that has a direct relationship with this plant. It uses its pollen exclusively for food, and so if you visit these flowers in the spring and you sit there with the camera, you'll often see them visited by these really tiny kind of iridescent bees, and those are those spring beauty miner bees. They're really neat. And again, these seeds split open. They do have a ballistic dispersal mechanism that throws the seed farther away, but they also have an elaiosome, and so ants will then take them further. Okay, so Dicentra, and I didn't know a better way of kind of generalizing this group of plants, because there are several species under the genus Dicentra, and they don't have a common name. But Dutchman's breeches, top left, and the top middle. Squirrel corn, top right. We have bleeding heart, bottom left. all of these are dicentra species, and each of them, have similar flower shapes, similar growth habits and patterns, similar pollination and seed dispersal mechanisms, even similar habitats, just with some variability in soil pH and rockiness, and also some kind of geographic limitations. These are plants that we find almost exclusively in rich coves. If you've ever come across a really large patch of them, they're just beautiful fern-like foliage. These really delicate flowers borne on racemes, kind of dangling over the plant. They have really interesting adaptations. So this is one of the Dicentra is a group that does not form special mycorrhizal relationships with fungi. Instead, it has adapted its root structures and grown like interesting root hairs, so it can survive and persist in those early spring moments when soil moisture and nutrient availability are low. So this one doesn't tap into a fungal network. It has different root structure to accommodate. So the most common you might see are these Dutchman's breeches with these yellow inner petals here that kind of pop out at the bottom of the flower. A lot of people describe them as looking like a pair of pants, pantaloons, if you will. And this squirrel corn here is very similar in nature. The plant is a little more robust. There's less flowers on the stalk. The flowers are a little bit larger than those of Dutchman's breeches. And also the inner petal is pink instead of yellow. And then you kind of have a more pink variation moving into Dicentra eximia, bleeding heart. And here you see, again, similar structure, wider opening, more akin to that of squirrel corn on bleeding heart. But again, just a really showy, beautiful pink flower. This is a common garden plant. However, unfortunately, there is a Japanese species that is the most commonly shared amongst gardeners. And so the term bleeding heart applies broadly. And so this is one of those examples where if you do want to purchase this plant, make sure that you are purchasing the native variety, if that's your intention, is to support native ecosystems, then trying to focus on and finding the native variety is important, because a lot of people will just sell this as bleeding heart and no species. And it's important to know the difference. The Japanese variety is much more distinct. I think it might be why the name bleeding hearts is so iconic, because the flower is actually heart shaped. It's much more pinkish reddish in color, much more showy, if you will. But if you are trying to find this plant for your home garden, make sure you look closely. Same thing goes with something like beautyberry. A lot of the Asian ones are sold as American across the board, so just look closely if you're trying to buy this plant. I also threw up this image of Adlumia fungosa, which is a fumitory. It's related. You can see the flower structure is pretty similar. This plant is not a dicentra, so it's family related, and it's also flowers in the fall. And so it's a rare plant. If you do end up finding a plant that looks like dicentra in the fall in like a rocky boulder field area, then you've probably got this Adlumia fungosa, which is again a rare plant, a really interesting one, and one that is ephemeral in its own right. It only flowers for like a week or so, and then it kind of rambles on and disappears. All right, heart leaves, Hexastylus. These are really interesting. I love to explore this genus, and I love stumbling upon them around. There is some taxonomic argument as to whether or not it is Hexastylus or a serum, but I'm going to keep it as Hexastylus now, as Weekly does. But these are in the birthwort family, wide range of flowering from late Feb all the way through May. I've still seen some of them flowering last week. Rich anesthetic coves, oak, hickory forest, very variable, but they all produce these really interesting urn-shaped flowers at the base of heart-shaped leaves generally, and you can see some variability in the shape of these urns and these leaves in these images. They're born on the ground, they're open to the ground, and they are pollinated by gnats, flies, and beetles. And so, a lot of this happens unnoticed. As you see from this first image, it's easy to kind of lose the jug in the midst of it all. And so I really appreciate the species because they're kind of quietly doing a lot of work, just existing on the forest floor. Great variability in leaves. This plant is great for the native plant garden at home as well. So some really good options for you there. And some of the most common species you'll see are Aerofolia, which is this kind of arrow-shaped one. Heterophila, which is a variable, but this is Heterophila here. Shuttleworthii, which is these large jugs. And then around here, I don't have an image of it, but around in the French Broad drainage, there's an endemic one called the French Broad heartleaf, Rhombiformis, and it's distinctly rhombic in shape. It takes an even more drastic kind of like rhombic turn on the edge of it. And so again, it's at a pretty narrow and confined geographic location in the French Broad River drainage, and a really neat plant. It's funny when you find it on a property, it's usually the dominant species there, and so you kind of get out of the mindset of how could this be rare, but it's just genetically distinct according to river drainage, and so pretty neat. Mayapples. I did see a comment in the chat about mayapples earlier, and we can talk about that. Someone did say that large patches of mayapples thriving in a kudzu-infested area. That's true. There's a spot on I-40 if you're driving down the grade towards Old Fort. You can see it on the right. It's a massive kudzu patch, and this time of year, when the kudzu is starting to leaf out, you can see the huge patches of mayapple below. Really interesting plant. It's in the barberry family. Produces this. It emerges from the ground. Here's a really tightly budded example. Beautiful white flowers born below the leaves, and so if you're above it, you can't really see it. And those turn into these kind of yellowish. When they ripen, they turn this yellowish fruit that is apparently wonderful, but also the seeds of which are deadly. And so if you do want to try and explore with this plant, again, there's cautions associated with edibility. So just keep that in mind. This is a plant that grows in relatively wide variety of habitats. I've seen it in rich coves. I've seen it in floodplains and flats. Again, forming these large colonies usually. And I heard this the other day. Someone said, "Oh, the ones that only grow one stalk are male." Well, actually, this is a monoecious plant, so it's not one or two stalks that make it male or female. It's the plants that have two stalks are the ones that can produce flowers, and there can be male and female and parts of male and female flowers on any plants. So it's not as simple as it sounded when someone said that the other day. As I mentioned, edible, but turtles and other forest animals absolutely love these. I have a patch in my yard, and I never can find them because they're always eaten. Trout lily. Very iconic species in the lily family. We have two here basically, umbilicatum and americanum, and they differ with their anther color and their flower shape and their size, but both of them kind of co-occur in riparian areas, both rich and acidic coves and floodplains on rich slopes. Its name was derived from the speckled leaf, similar to like a speckled trout. It's a bulb-forming plant. It develops large colonies. It's edible, but again, please don't. Just enjoy it the way it is. And again, this is another one pollinated primarily by mining bees, seeds spread by ants. And so a lot of these kind of congeners, these co-occurring species, use similar modes of seed transport, which makes perfect sense. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I realize my loquacious nature, we're kind of bucking up against 12:45, but I want to get through these slides because there's a couple interesting ones at the end. So dwarf larkspur, really striking plant, one of the purplest wildflowers that we have in the forests, and it really only occurs in kind of the richest of rich coves. And so if you find this plant, you know you're in a pretty good habitat, at least in terms of soil pH, in terms of moisture. You've got the potential for a really nice rich cove there. It flowers in April to May in high pH soils. Its name is derived from the spur that is on the back of this flower, which I realize doesn't show up in very well. It kind of if you can see my cursor, I'm kind of tracing it here, but it points up. It looks like kind of like a hat, kind of behind this top petal. All parts of it are toxic, and I thought it's interesting. I did a little research here too, and I knew bees visit it because I've seen it, but hummingbirds also really appreciate this plant, and so I would love to be in a cove one time and see a hummingbirds swing by and visit. That would be wonderful. The seed structures are scimitars here. You see these little kind of curved shapes. They will split open and reveal all these tiny seeds that are generally wind dispersed or motion dispersed by something walking by. Hydrophyllum. This is one of my favorite plants to see out in the woods, and I like it. It's so simply named. It looks like someone splashed water onto the leaf. And across most of the species in the genus, the exception being Atranthum in the bottom right, you have that nice dappled speckled look. This is in the forget-me-nots family, Boraginaceae, flowering from April through June, depending on which species you're talking about. Primarily rich coves and slopes. Sometimes it's at like high elevation, rich oak forests. That's where Atranthum really likes to grow. It's pollinated by bumblebees and other native bees, but there are specialists that require this plant not only for nectary and for pollen, but also for structure. And so there's this waterleaf miner bee, which cuts holes out of and builds a nest from pieces of waterleaf. And then there's this waterleaf cuckoo bee, which is like a parasitic bee that uses other bees' nests and uses other bees to raise their young, and relies on the waterleaf for pollen grains. And so a really interesting niche relationship that you find when you look closer into these species. We've got Canadense, we've got Virginianum, we've got Atranthum here, which is endemic to the Southern Appalachians, and then Macrophyllum, which is up in the top right corner here. It's much more elongated and dissected leaf, and that's relatively rare. You find that one, excuse me, you find that one. Well, you can find it in the Sandy Mush Valley. There's amphibolite slopes up there and a lot of rich soils and rich slopes, and so that's kind of a stronghold for the species. But it's farther dispersed throughout the Western mountains. We have toothworts in the mustard family. You probably recognize these flowers. They look a lot like broccoli flowered or mustard flowers or radish flowers if you let them go in your garden. And similarly, these plants do have a history of edibility and food value for indigenous groups. A ridge cove plant, riparian forest plant as well. Pollinated by bees, flies, really small things. And there's a special relationship. This West Virginia white butterfly, its critical host plant is Cardamine concatenata, which is the cutleaf toothwort. This one you see up here. And that the butterfly requires that plant. And so oftentimes when you're in rich coves in the early spring and you see these cardamines blooming, you'll sit and wait, and you'll see West Virginia whites flitting around looking for them. So I always, whenever I find this plant flowering, I sit down and wait and watch for butterflies. Trillium. It's sad I have to go quickly through this slide, but the trillium is one of our most charismatic wildflowers, occurring through probably the widest range of environments that we have here in the Southern Appalachians, and also exhibiting some of the widest range of flower morphology that I can think of within a genus. And so, we have, again, just a really wide diversity. Catesby's trillium is top right. That's more of like a oak hickory forest species, maybe a little bit rich, but maybe a little bit floodplain. But then you've got a lot of kind of these characteristic rich cove species, Trillium erectum, red version, Trillium grandiflorum, this open white one, sulcatum here, beautiful maroon flowers, really large. You've got Trillium cuneatum over here, Sweet Betsy, which is probably the most common one we see, and you can find it in urbanized areas throughout Asheville. And this plant kind of gets around and it stays around. It can even tolerate disturbance. And then you've got some interesting ones like this painted Trillium, which has recently left the genus Trillium and is now in Trillidium due to its genetic distinction. And then this one occurs up in like kind of higher elevations, more northern latitudes, very common up in like Maine, so you find it up at like spruce fir forests in that area, up near the Parkway. And then you have this really kind of niche one down here, Trillium discolor. It's I can't remember the common name for it, but it's restricted to the Savannah River drainage in kind of like the Toxaway River, Horse Pasture River Gorge coming off the escarpment. And so these are speciated in different habitats and again, lots of variability, really interesting, lots of smell variation. These are ones that I always like to smell and compare. Some of them smell like wet dogs, some of them smell like perfume. My children say one of them smells like lipstick. It's really interesting. I encourage you to get out there and sniff.
Hey,
Orchid.
I'm sorry to interrupt you on that last slide, and I think
Mhm.
maybe the one before it, there was some asterisks. And so I think one of the participants was asking
Ah,
what the asterisks denote.
good call. The asterisks denote a rare species within the genus. And so the common ones lack asterisks. If there's like a little up arrow, I don't know the technical name for that. That's like a species that is endemic locally. So it's on here and nowhere else, essentially. But if you see an asterisk, it indicates a rare species within the genus.
Thanks.
Yeah. Um, okay. Where were we? Orchids, orchids persist throughout the spring, summer, and even some kind of poking towards fall. And so the suite of orchids I've got pictured here are ones that you'll find in the spring, some of which are common, others of which are not. They all have diverse pollinators and unique mycorrhizal relationships. Orchids are some very strange plants, and they have very unique and specific relationships above and below ground with pollinators, with fungi. Worth a deep dive if you ever get interested in one species. But kind of clockwise from the top, we've got this really rare Wister's coral root, one I found a couple weeks ago in Buncombe County on a piece of farmland preservation property. We have Adam and Eve orchid, a plectrum, which generally you notice the leaf and then the leaf drops and the flower stalk comes up with no leaf at the bottom. So it's either you notice the leaf or you notice the flower. Pink lady slipper, probably our most iconic orchid in the area. But one of the rarer and even more special, arguably, is the yellow lady slipper, of which there are two different species. The showy orchis here, kind of a small but really bright and beautiful plant, wonderfully scented. And then this bottom middle one is the lily-leaved twayblade, which is an uncommon orchid. It's not rare. It's just easy to overlook because the leaves look a lot like something else, like a lily, and the flowers are kind of mauve and kind of, if you walk past it, the dappled shade will kind of totally hide the flowers. And so, those are ones to be on the lookout for. This Liparis lilafolia here, and also, chance occurrence, spring coral root. If you see a plant with no leaves emerging with, little flowers like this in the spring, chances are it's Wister's coral root, a significantly rare species in the state. So, oddity slide, real quick. We got some categories of ephemeral plants that maybe aren't herbaceous or maybe are a little different, don't fit the category, but still show up in the spring, are striking, are weird, are strange, have interesting life histories, and I just wanted to cover them real quick. Things like heterotrophs and mycoheterotrophs. So heterotrophs steal energy from roots. This aphyllon here, one-flowered cancer roots in the broomrape family, that is parasitic or saprophytic on the roots of plants. Compare that to something like sweet pine sap here at the bottom left, pygmy pipes. That is a mycoheterotroph. So it's one step further. It said, forget the plant roots. I'm going to get energy from the roots of the fungus that's getting energy from the plants. And so this plant, vascular plant, has no chlorophyll, taps into the roots of fungi for its energy. Very rare. And if you ever find it, you smell it before you see it. It's about an inch tall off the ground or 2 inches tall, and smells like cloves and cinnamon and violets. It's the most complex and beautiful smell I've ever smelled in the forest. Then we have things like parasites, true parasites. Castellea, which is scarlet paintbrush in the top right here. That is a light parasite on the roots of grasses. And so where you have slopes that have high exposure and lots of grasses, you might find this plant popping up right now, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's a flame right now, and then it kind of drops out in about a month and then goes dormant. We have monocarps, interesting, weird plants that flower once and then die completely. So this is Frasera carolinensis. It's American Columbo over here on the middle right. And this plant may lay dormant for 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 years, growing vegetatively, and then all of a sudden flower, spontaneously, produce tons of seeds, and then the entire plant, root and all, dies. And so, you know, you've kind of have these fits and starts of flowering throughout its life history. And if you ever have a chance and you're in kind of the Hayesville area, Nantahala National Forest, you can find populations of this. Really, really interesting plant. We have hysteranths, which are plants that flower before any leaves come out. The most characteristic of which is probably Vases rhododendron or pink shell azalea in the top right and the top middle here. But then we also have plants like Pachysandra procumbens, Allegheny spurge, which you know, is kind of like semi-hysteranth because the old leaves from last year are out, but these flowers come up and then are immediately followed by emergent new leaves. And so a really interesting, bizarre looking plant, great for the garden if you are looking for something for a native ground cover. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention graminoids, and specifically the weirdo that is Carex fraseriana, Fraser's sedge. It's the showiest sedge of them all. It's in the bottom right here, and you can see it's got these wild perigynia, wild flowering spikes, and male and female flowers. Really, really showy. Again, one that kind of co-occurs in that Nantahala National Forest area. And then we've got a just plain weirdo. Up here, American golden saxifrage, Chrysosplenium americanum, known to seeps in rich areas, high elevation forests. And this is it in full flower. You know, if I had something in there for scale, this would fit in the middle of a dime. You could probably fit 5 or 6 of these flowers on the head of a dime. And this is in full flower right now. So it's a saxifrage, it's a mat forming plant. But again, one of those early spring flowering plants that you could easily miss. That is a part of these wonderful ecosystems. And so I had one more slide. I shouldn't leave here without mentioning the critters, because the plants come out in spring, and so do some special critters that are responding to those plants or to those ephemeral things happening in spring. We have things like mole salamanders and green salamanders that emerge early on in spring. Mole salamanders move to ephemeral pools, and so they're tied to ephemeral habitats. We have newts that also are tied to ephemeral habitats. This is a red eft stage, and then there will be a aquatic stage of the newt, you know, if this thing makes it and lays eggs in time. There are spotted salamanders also associated with ephemeral pools. And then there are really early season butterflies and pollinators like spicebush swallowtail, that West Virginia white, which we talked about. We have morning cloak butterflies, which are almost exclusively sap drinking butterflies. And then we have like beautiful luna moths, which if you've ever been graced by the presence of one of those out in the middle of the woods, they're just phenomenal. But don't want to forget about these interesting ephemeral animals that are associated with these you know, springtime pulses. We don't want to forget about this. So I have a little bit of time for Q&A. I know, I'm sorry, I only left 2 minutes, but I'm happy to take some questions. Or let me look. Let's see. Okay, Emma, thank you for adding the link to the ant dispersal. Really like that. Question about kudzu. If anybody else has any questions now, just drop them in the chat. But otherwise, you know, I threw a lot of information at you. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate your interest in native plants and ephemeral wildflowers and the ecosystems within which they occur. And I would encourage you to get out there and look for some of these things next spring. You'll still be able to catch some of them, but I know that maybe Emma, you could drop it in the chat. But there are some properties that SAHC has protected where the public can access and see a lot of these wildflowers, including some of the interesting and more uncommon ones. And so, you know, places like Rocky Fork, over the gap in Tennessee, Bailey Mountain Preserve. Even places like Chestnut Mountain Bike Park and the back nine back there that has variably undisturbed forests, hosts a lot of these interesting plants. And so I would encourage you to take this information and get out there and explore and look for these beautiful, interesting, uncommon, weird, strange, and inspiring plants.
Oh, and thank you so much. That is just a fantastic presentation. It's so beautiful, and I feel like I learned a lot. It did make me wish that I was outside in the forest, though, instead of in my office. But can't thank you enough. That's just a wonderful presentation, and it'll be up on YouTube. I think lots of folks want to watch it again.
Sure.
We posted it, and before we break, we did have one question. I don't know if you can answer it quickly, but whether there's any tips for trying to encourage pink lady slippers to spread.
There I don't know if I have a tip per se. I think I could give you some anecdotal observations of places where I have seen patches wane and wax. So there's a really well-visited patch in Pisgah National Forest. It's probably like the most Instagrammed patch out there. And I've seen that population wane over time. And I'm sorry, I'm approaching this from the inverse. And I think it's because there may be soil compaction and disturbance that could be interfering or disrupting the mycorrhizal networks that are critical to the success of pink lady slippers. So I think visiting them and respecting the space within which they grow so that you reduce soil compaction is probably important. I can also say that in places where the forest has become naturally thinner, so in other populations that are near, let's say, white pine or trees that are more susceptible to blowing over, where there have been light gaps, I have noticed seemingly that light has maybe seemingly benefited the populations. And I can't say in terms of expansion or not, but it seems to be helping the immediate population. And I would imagine that promoting a robust existing population would probably lead to the best results in terms of flowering. But I don't know of any like mechanical things that you could do or tips or tricks to actually get it to spread, just because its relationships above and below ground are so complex. But those are some thoughts.
Thanks so much, Owen. And we really want to thank all the participants in the webinar too. And this has just been wonderful. Emma put in the chat that we're going to host a wildflower walk. It's next month, so it's kind of after the spring ephemerals, I guess. But that'll be June 14th at our June Jamboree. So check out our website and please register if you're interested in joining us for that. And again, we'll put this up on YouTube. And again, thanks everybody. This has been wonderful. We really appreciate you, Owen, for sharing your knowledge with us and beautiful images too.
Absolutely. And if anyone would like to follow up about anything, the slide's up, take a picture of it, shoot me an email and we'll go from there.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much for your time, Owen. Have a good one,
Yeah,
everyone.
absolutely. Bye.
Bye.